In Climate Watch, the Trump administration is looking to greenlight a consequential drilling project in Alaska before the Biden administration takes over. Oil and gas firms are bidding on the chance to secure drilling rights in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is home to thousands of native animals. It's just one of several environmental rule changes the Trump administration is considering before its time in the White House comes to a close. Juliet Eilperin is the reporter behind this article, and she joins us now to talk about this. She's a senior national affairs correspondent for the Washington Post. Juliet, I guess the first thing is the fact that we're starting to see moves like this by the Trump administration does give some insight into the fact that they understand that come January 20th, there will be a new president of the United States. If not, they wouldn't be making all these moves. And one of the more critical ones is the one we're talking about now. Environmental activists have long protested any kind of drilling in the refuge. Explain why it would be detrimental. It's remarkable that we have to explain this again because we've been talking about this for the last 15 years or so, but explain to our viewers why it would be detrimental and what's so significant about this corner of the United States.
Sure thing. So the Trump administration, back when the Republicans controlled both the House and the Senate, helped pass a budget bill that mandated the leasing in this very sensitive area that's been fought over for 40 years. It's, on Alaska's North Slope. It's home to, for example, the southern Beaufort Sea population of polar bears, which are listed under the Endangered Species Act. There are roughly, less than 300 of them left on Earth. There are thousands of migrating caribou, hundreds of thousands of migrating waterfowl. It's a relatively untouched wilderness, area that the Obama administration had identified as to be protected as wilderness, but it does have significant oil and gas deposits, and so there are some companies that have been eyeing this for drilling for some time, and now the administration is trying to see if it can lock in those leases before January 20th.
So Republicans approved drilling in the refuge, and short form is ANWR. People might have heard that in discussions about this. That approval came in 2017, but as you point out, the leases weren't purchased. The Trump administration, I believe, was sort of floating this as a great way to make money and make up for some of the tax cuts in the last tax legislation. But since 2017 and now, the price of oil has really fluctuated. I'm wondering, is this even going to be as lucrative as they promise? And why is the Trump administration soliciting bids now?
It certainly won't be as lucrative as the administration had promised, that it would raise huge sums of money, as you said. And in fact, it's incredibly expensive and difficult to drill in this terrain. As you can imagine, it's frigid. There's no infrastructure there. There's actually an issue about getting significant portions of water to, manage to do your operations, particularly because many of these vehicles operate on ice roads where they have to lay down water to freeze in order to not have as much of an impact on, as you're seeing, those polar bears who are very sensitive to disturbance. And the tundra is disturbed, that also has real implications. And so as a result, there's a real question of whether it's worth anyone's time or effort to extract this oil, which is very costly at a time when, you both have a relatively low price for oil and obviously changes in the transportation system that ultimately could lead to lower demand, given that, it will take years to actually get this oil out of the ground and ship it elsewhere. And so, but if they can manage to sell off these leases in the next 2 months, it will make it much more difficult for the next administration to restrict drilling there, although not impossible.
As we mentioned, this isn't the only change from the administration. You have reporting on new rules for the U.S. Forest Service, which don't require environmental review. Explain what's happening here.
Just yesterday, the U.S. Forest Service finalized a rule that would make it easier for them to invoke a provision under the law called categorical exclusions, where they don't have to do the same sort of detailed environmental review before approving projects on forest land. And that can include, for example, logging, which the Trump administration consistently argues is one of the best ways to address wildfire risk. But obviously, this has drawn a lot of concern from environmentalists who say that by speeding up permitting for logging and other activities on forest land, you could be jeopardizing, again, wildlife and the terrain. And this comes, of course, at a time when we clearly are seeing the impacts of climate change on national forests and areas across the country that, of course, are leading to more intense and more frequent wildfires. So this is, again, it's one of these procedural changes that, might not seem, that significant, but in fact, it does have implications. And again, by locking in, say, a change like this, now the next administration would have to rewrite the entire rule in order to operate differently. So it does have longer lasting ramifications.
So, the Trump administration has, long argued that it's important to protect the environment, but you also have to balance the needs of industry. You can't let the cure be worse than the disease, if you will. Probably a poorly chosen metaphor considering we're in the middle of a pandemic. But when you look at the president's cabinet appointments and policy decisions, when it comes to the environment and climate change, how do you characterize them? What do you believe are sort of the short and long-term implications of some of the decisions that we have seen over the last 4 years?
The Trump administration has clearly de-emphasized addressing climate change and the need to cut greenhouse gas emissions. And by their own description, they have prioritized some other issues, whether it's cleaning up Superfund sites or addressing potentially some of water contamination issues. They have really kind of hit the pause button on the United States addressing greenhouse gas emissions that are driving climate change. And so, and at the same time, they have really tried to change the rules of the road for how the government operates to make it easier to, whether it's extract oil and gas, expand industrial activity across protected areas in this country. So it will certainly take time. My colleagues and I have documented that this administration has weakened or rolled back more than 125 environmental rules and policies across the federal government. Some of those you can flip the switch and change them on the first day that Joe Biden is sworn in, and others will take years to change. And so it certainly does. They have helped reset the clock, and it'll be interesting to see how the government moves forward with this.
Well, we know you'll be on it. Juliet Eilperin, thank you so much.
Thank you.